My name is Yusuf ibn Bekir, and I am the last man alive who knows the truth about what happened in the village of Kestane. I did not believe in curses. I did not believe in monsters. I was a man of reason, a scholar trained in the libraries of Bursa, who carried ink-stained fingers and a mind sharpened by logic. I believed that every shadow had a source, that every scream had a cause, and that every mystery given enough time would surrender to the patient mind. I was wrong about all of it. It began in the autumn of the year when the harvest failed for the third time in a row. The village elders said it was God's punishment. The women said it was the old mountain's anger. I said it was drought. But none of us said what it truly was. None of us dared. I arrived in Kestane by horse, 3 days after the first body was found. I had been summoned by the bey himself, a man named Arslan Bey, broad-shouldered and silver-bearded, who ruled this mountain province with a heavy hand and a heavier heart. His letter had reached me in Bursa, and it had contained only 6 words that I remember still. Come quickly. Something is hunting my people. The road into Kestane wound through a forest of chestnut trees. The village had taken its name from them. But that autumn, the trees had shed their leaves too early. The branches were bare and black against a gray sky, like the fingers of dead men reaching upward. My horse, a steady beast I called Kuzgun, the raven, became restless as we entered the tree line. She snorted, stamped, and refused to move for nearly a quarter hour. I should have listened to her. I dismounted and led her through by hand. The forest floor was silent. No birds. No wind. Only the soft crunch of my boots on dead leaves, and somewhere, far above, the creaking of branches against each other, a sound that I would later come to understand was not the wind at all. I entered Kestane just as evening fell. The village was perhaps 40 households clustered around a central square, dominated by a stone mosque whose minaret had cracked down one side, another omen I ignored. Torches burned at every doorway, which was unusual. In my experience, fire was only lit so eagerly when people were afraid of the dark. A young boy spotted me at the edge of the square and ran. Not toward me. Away from me. I heard him shouting, "A stranger! A stranger has come." Within moments I was surrounded. Not by welcome. By suspicion. A dozen men with torches and farming tools stood in a loose circle around me. In their center stood a woman who clearly commanded more authority than any of them. She was perhaps 50 years old, with silver-streaked black hair beneath a dark headscarf, and eyes the color of flint. She wore the clothing of someone who had not slept in several days. She looked at me the way you look at something that might solve your problem, or make it worse. "You are the scholar from Bursa?" she said. "I am Yusuf ibn Bekir," I said. "And you are?" "Hafsa Hatton," she replied. "Widow of the village elder. And the closest thing to a leader this village has left." She led me to the elder's house, her house now. Inside it smelled of dried herbs and burnt wood. A fire crackled in the center hearth, and several people sat around it with the hollow eyes of people who had been awake for too long. Hafsa Hatton poured tea without asking if I wanted any and set it before me with the authority of someone used to deciding what others needed. Then she sat across from me and folded her hands. "3 are dead," she said. "Osman the shepherd, Fatma, the miller's daughter, and old Mem the blacksmith." "How were they killed?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Torn," she said finally, "as if by a great animal. But the tracks," she stopped. "What about the tracks?" "They are not animal tracks," said a man by the fire. He was young, perhaps 20, with the nervous energy of someone who had been holding a secret too long. His name, I would learn, was Kemal, the blacksmith's apprentice, orphaned now by whatever had taken his master. "Not animal," Kemal repeated. "And not human. Something in between." I did not sleep that night. Not because I was afraid. I told myself it was because I was thinking. I sat by the window of the room they gave me and I reviewed what I knew. 3 deaths. No witnesses. Animal-like wounds but ambiguous tracks. A village already frayed by failed harvests and suspicion. I told myself there was a rational explanation. I told myself that until dawn. The second morning brought a 4th death. A young man named Tariq, son of a farmer, barely 17, was found at the edge of the apple orchard at the eastern end of the village. I was taken to see the body before the women had come to prepare it for burial, and what I saw there made my scholar's certainty begin, for the first time, to crack. The wounds were unlike anything I had studied. I had read accounts of wolf attacks, of bear encounters, of the worst that wild animals could do to a human body. This was different. The force behind the wounds was extraordinary. Bones had been broken that should not have broken, ribs cracked inward from the front as if something had simply pressed through them. But what disturbed me most were the handprints. In the soft earth beside the body there were handprints. Human handprints, 5 fingers, a palm, unmistakably a man's hand. But they were sunk deep into the mud, as if the hand that made them weighed many times what a man should weigh. And at the end of each finger, the earth was gouged in a way that only claws could manage. I crouched and studied them for a long time. "You see now," said Hafsa Hatton behind me. "Do you believe us?" "I believe something unusual is happening," I said carefully. "I do not yet know what." She made a short, humorless sound. "Unusual," she repeated. "My people are dying and the scholar from Bursa calls it unusual." I spent the morning questioning everyone who would speak to me. Most would not. Fear had sealed their mouths, or suspicion had, for there was a rumor beginning to move through the village like smoke, that the killer was not a creature from outside Kestane, but someone within it. Someone who was human by day, and something else by night. The name being whispered, always in low voices, always with glances over shoulders, was Salim. Salim was the village's tanner. A large man, wide through the shoulders, who worked alone at the edge of the village where the smell of his trade would not bother the others. He was not from Kestane originally. He had arrived 6 years ago from somewhere east, from the mountains near the Persian border, and he had never spoken much of his past. He was not unfriendly, people said. But he was solitary. And since the killings had begun, he had not been seen in the square. I decided to visit him. I walked to the tannery alone, against Hafsa Hatton's warnings. The tannery was a stone building at the edge of a small stream, surrounded by the frames of stretched hides and the sharp smell of oak bark and urine. The door was open. I knocked and called out. No answer. I stepped inside. The tannery was empty of people but full of evidence of life. A half-eaten meal on the workbench, a fire still warm in the hearth, tools laid out as if their owner had simply stepped away. And on the floor near the back wall, something that stopped my breath entirely. A pile of clothing. A man's robe, a belt, sandals. And around them, in a rough circle, scratch marks in the stone floor. Deep scratch marks. The kind that claws make. I stood very still. Then I heard breathing from outside. I turned slowly. Salim stood in the doorway. He was a big man, bigger than I had expected, taller than average with shoulders that seemed to fill the frame. He had dark, deep-set eyes and a jaw shadowed with several days of beard. He looked at me without surprise, which somehow frightened me more than anything else so far. "You are the scholar?" he said. His voice was calm, level. "I am," I said. "And you are Salim." "I know why you're here," he said. "You've come to decide if I am the monster." I said nothing. He walked past me to the workbench, sat down heavily and put his face in his hands. "I did not kill those people," he said. His voice had changed, lower now and rough with something that sounded almost like grief. "But I know what did." I pulled a stool and sat across from him. "Tell me," I said. And he did.
Salim's story took most of the afternoon. He had grown up in a village called Aydinlik, east of Erzincan, where the mountains were older than memory and the people still observed customs that had no name in any religious text. His father had been a hunter. His grandfather had been a hunter before that. And 3 generations back, his great-grandfather had done something in those mountains, something Salim described only as a transgression that had earned the family a curse. Not immediately, not obviously. The curse worked slowly, like a stain spreading through cloth. In each generation, one member of the family would begin to change. Always in autumn, always when the moon was full, always beginning with the same signs: a burning fever, an inability to sleep, an animal restlessness that grew worse as the moon approached its peak. "My father told me before he died," Salim said. "He told me what to watch for. He told me it had taken him as well, in his 30th year. He said there was a way to control it: fasting, prayer, staying away from others during the dangerous nights."
He paused.
"He also told me that control was not the same as cure." "And you?" I asked carefully. "Has it taken you?" He looked up at me. His eyes, I noticed for the first time, were not quite right in the firelight. The pupils, even in the dim room, were too wide. "I have managed," he said quietly. "For 6 years here, I have managed. I have not harmed anyone. I have been careful." "Then what is killing the villagers?" He was quiet for a long time. "I am not the only one," he said finally. The words settled in the room like stones dropped into still water. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There is another," he said. Someone else who carries what I carry. Someone who came to this village before me, or perhaps someone who was infected by contact with me, though I have been careful. He stopped himself.
No.
No, that is not how it works. You cannot catch it like a fever. You must be born into it. Or cursed into it, I said. He nodded slowly. Or cursed. Then there is someone else in this village, I said, who shares your condition. Yes. And you know who it is? A long silence. I have a suspicion, he said. But I need you to understand something, scholar. If I tell you who I suspect, and if I am wrong, I will have condemned an innocent person. This village is already frightened. Frightened people do not investigate. They execute. And if you are right, I pressed. He met my eyes. Then we need to stop them before the next full moon, he said, which is in 3 days.
I will tell you that I still did not fully believe. I am being honest with you. Even then, sitting in the tannery with Salim's dark eyes fixed on mine and the evidence of claws scratched into the stone floor beneath my feet, even then, the part of my mind that had been educated in libraries and trained in logic was constructing alternative explanations. A large animal. An unusual disease. Mass hysteria. The desperate need of frightened people to find patterns in tragedy. But I am also honest enough to tell you that I investigated as if I believed. Because 4 people were dead and the moon was 3 days away. That evening, I sat with Hafsa Hatton and laid out what I had learned without revealing Salim's confidence. I told her I suspected someone in the village, someone who might be acting in a state they were not fully conscious of, perhaps under the influence of some malady I had not yet categorized. She watched me with those flint gray eyes. "You're being careful with your words," she said. "You mean a wolf man?" I said nothing. "We know the old stories," she said quietly. "We are mountain people, Yusuf ibn Bekir. We have lived in the shadow of old things longer than cities like Bursa have existed." She folded her hands. "I have been wondering myself. I have been watching." "Watching who?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "There is a man," she said slowly. "Murat Shalebi. He came to us 2 years ago to serve as the Bey's local representative, a tax collector and minor official. He is educated, well-spoken, respected." She paused. "But in the weeks before each killing he disappears at night. He sleeps through the mornings. He has injuries he cannot explain." Another pause. "And the first killing, Osman the shepherd, it happened the night after Murat Shalebi arrived back from a journey east." Murat Shalebi. I turned the name over in my mind. I had not yet met him. He had been away from the village on Bey's business, or so I had been told, and was expected back that evening. "Does Salim know him?" I asked. Hafsa Hatton's eyes sharpened. "You have spoken to Salim." "He is a member of this village," I said carefully. "I have spoken to everyone." She studied me for a moment. Then, "I do not know if they know each other. I do know that Murat Shalebi went east 6 months before the killing started. He was gone for 3 months. He came back changed." She paused. Thinner. Quieter. With a scar on his neck that he would not explain. I sat with that information for a long moment. A scar on his neck. A journey east to the old mountains. Change. I thought of Salim's words, *, you cannot catch it like a fever. You must be born into it, *. But what if that was not entirely true? What if there was something in those old mountains, something in those old stones, that could reach out and change a man who was not ready for it? Who had not been taught to control it? A man who did not even know what was happening to him? Murat Shalebi arrived at the village square just as the evening call to prayer faded from the cracked minaret. I watched him from across the square. He was perhaps 40, lean and well-dressed in the manner of a minor official, with quick dark eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything, settling on nothing. He greeted Hafsa Hatton with the practiced courtesy of a man who needed her cooperation. He was charming, articulate, completely at ease. And then his gaze fell on me, and for just one moment, one fraction of a breath, something else moved behind those quick dark eyes. Recognition. And something beneath recognition. Fear. "You are the scholar from Bursa," he said, extending his hand. "I have heard of your arrival. I hope you will find answers for these poor people." "I hope so too," I said. I shook his hand. His grip was very strong. His skin was very warm. That night I set a watch. I did not tell Hafsa Hatton. I did not tell Kamal, the blacksmith's apprentice, who had begun following me around with the desperate hopefulness of someone who needs to do something to stop feeling helpless. I did not tell Salim. I simply did not sleep. I sat in the shadows at the edge of the village square, wrapped in a dark robe against the autumn cold, and I waited. The moon rose late that night, not yet full but bright enough. The village was silent. Every door was bolted. Every shutter was drawn. The torches at the doorways had burned low. I waited. Near midnight I heard a door open. Murat Shalebi's house, a modest stone building on the northern edge of the square, provided by the bey for his representative, and then I saw him emerge. He was dressed but barely, robe hanging open, feet bare despite the cold. He moved with a strange, unsteady quality, as if he was walking in his sleep, or fighting against something that wanted him to move differently. He stood in the square for a long moment. Then he looked directly at me. I did not move. I was deep in shadow. He should not have been able to see me. But he looked directly at me. And slowly his face changed. Not dramatically. Not the way the old stories describe. No explosion of fur, no shattering of bones beneath skin. Just a slow, terrible shifting. The proportions of his face became subtly wrong. His posture changed, his spine curving forward with a new and wrong kind of ease. His hands, hanging at his sides, spread their fingers wide. I could hear him breathing from across the square. I want to be precise about this because I am a scholar and precision matters to me. What I saw that night did not fit any category in my training. It did not fit the category of man, nor the category of animal, nor the category of illness. It was something older than all three. He moved. Not toward me, toward the eastern edge of the village, toward the orchard. The same direction where Tariq had been found. I followed. I should not have. I was a scholar, not a soldier. I had no weapon, no armor, nothing but my ink-stained hands and my increasingly shaken certainty. But 4 people were dead, and the moon had 2 more nights to reach its full, and if I was wrong about everything I suspected, then there was still a killer moving through this village, and that was not something I could walk away from. So I followed. The orchard was silver and black in the moonlight. The bare apple trees cast long shadows across the frost-stiff grass. I moved as quietly as I could, keeping to the tree line, tracking the figure of Murat Shalebi, if it was still him, as he moved deeper into the orchard. He stopped. He stood in a small clearing between the trees, his back to me, his shoulders heaving with each breath. The breathing had become louder, rougher. Wrong. I stepped on a twig. The crack of it was impossibly loud in the silence. He turned. What looked back at me from Murat Shalebi's face was not entirely Murat Shalebi. I will not pretend otherwise. I saw what I saw. The eyes were wrong, golden in the moonlight, pupils vertical, more animal than human. The jaw had shifted forward, and when it opened, the teeth behind it were not the teeth of any man I had ever met. He was still clothed, still upright, still recognizable, but only barely. The thing wearing Murat Shalebi's face looked at me the way a wolf looks at something it is deciding whether to hunt. I did not run. I have thought about this many times since. Running would have been the sensible choice. But something in me, the part that studies problems, that needs to understand, held me very still. Murat Shalebi, I said. Quietly. Steadily. The thing stopped. I know you are in there, I said. I know you did not choose this.
Please,
I know you may not
beg you,
even
let me
understand
go.
what is happening to you.
Your time
paused,
is over.
But you need to hear
cannot
me.
Escape.
There are people who can
No,
help you.
stay back,
You do
I
not have to be
deny
alone with
your
this.
fate.
The
I
longest
see.
10 seconds of my
I
life.
see.
Then the shoulders
There is
dropped.
none.
The breathing slowed. Something in the face, in the eyes, shifted. The gold did not entirely leave them. But the intention behind them changed. He dropped to his knees in the frost-stiff grass and pressed both hands against the sides of his head, and from his throat came a sound that I cannot accurately describe. Not a scream. Not a howl. Something broken and human and animal both at once. I knelt beside him. It's all right, I said, and I was lying because it was not all right, not even slightly, but sometimes the lie is what keeps a man from destroying himself in a moment of despair. I don't remember, he whispered. His voice was his own again, shaking and raw. I never remember. I wake up and there's blood I can't explain and I can't. He stopped. Am I the one who killed them? I looked at him, this man on his knees in the cold, this bewildered, terrified, dangerous man who had no idea what he was, and I thought about what Salim had told me about control, about the long years of learning his own nature. I think so, I said honestly. But I also think you can stop. What followed was neither simple nor clean. Simple and clean are for stories told by people who were not there. What I have to tell you is messier than that. I brought Salim to Murat Shalebi in the hours before dawn. The 2 men sat across from each other in the tannery, the only place I could think of where we would not be disturbed, and looked at each other with the complicated recognition of people who share something that no one else understands. Salim asked how long. Murat Shalebi said he did not know exactly. He had gone east the previous year, traveling on Bey's business through the mountain provinces, and had spent a night in a ruined caravanserai near the Persian border. Something had attacked him there in the dark. He had never seen it clearly, had thought at the time it was a wolf or a large dog, had treated his wounds himself, had thought nothing more of it. Until autumn came. I sat and listened to them talk. The man who had been born into this, who had spent years learning to live with it, and the man who had stumbled into it without a map or a guide, and who had in his bewilderment destroyed 4 lives and possibly his own. They spoke in low voices for a long time. I was the scholar from Bursa, and I could do nothing for them except listen and think. By dawn, we had reached something that I would not call a solution, but perhaps a beginning. Salim would teach Murat Shalebi what he knew. The methods of control, the fasting before the full moon, the isolation, the prayer, the understanding of one's own warning signs, the importance of honesty with oneself about one's nature. It was not a cure. There was no cure. But it was the difference between a man who was dangerous and a man who managed to be, most of the time, safe. For the families of the dead there was restitution. I negotiated this myself with Hafsa Hatton, who was, I learned, more flexible in her thinking than I had initially given her credit for. Murat Shalebi's considerable salary as the Bey's representative would be paid to the bereaved families for the next 10 years. He would remain in Kestane under Salim's informal supervision, and would absent himself to a prepared and isolated stone room on the nights surrounding each full moon. It was an imperfect arrangement. But the killing stopped. I stayed in Kestane for another 2 weeks. I told Arslan Bey, when he came in person to receive my report, that the killings had been the work of a large and unusual wolf that had since moved on, and that proper precautions had been taken. The Bey was not, I think, entirely convinced. But he was a practical man who wanted a practical answer, and I gave him one. On my last morning in the village, Hafsa Hatton walked me to my horse. "Will you write about this?" she asked. "In your studies?" I thought about that for a moment. "Not yet," I said. "Some truths need time before they're ready to be written." She looked at me with those flint gray eyes. "Are they truths," she said quietly, "or are they just things you haven't been able to explain yet?" I swung up onto Kuzgun's back. "In my experience," I said, "there is very little difference. I rode out of Kestane the way I had come, through the chestnut forest with its bare black branches against the gray autumn sky. The trees were still silent. No birds. No wind. But this time I did not feel watched. Or perhaps I had simply become less certain about what watching meant. I have never returned to Kestane. I received one letter from Hafsa Hatton 3 years later, telling me that the village had survived the winter, that the harvest had returned, that Salim still lived and worked at the tannery, and that Murat Shalebi had learned, slowly, imperfectly, with great difficulty, to manage what he carried. She said no one else had died. I keep her letter in the back of a book on natural philosophy that I have never been able to finish writing. Every time I try to write the chapter that belongs after what I witnessed in Kestane, the chapter about the limits of reason, about the things that live in the spaces between what we can explain, I stop. Because I am still not sure what to call what I saw. I am still not sure what category it belongs in. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the honest answer is that not everything in this world fits inside the categories we build to contain it. Perhaps there are things older than our words for them, living in the mountains and the old stones, in the blood and the bone, in the turning of seasons that have been turning longer than any man's memory can reach. I am Yusuf ibn Bekir, scholar of Bursa, and I have spent 30 years trying to explain what I saw in that orchard under the almost full moon. I have not yet succeeded. But every autumn, when the leaves fall early and the air turns cold and the moon begins to fatten toward its fullness, I close my shutters and I light an extra candle, and I listen very carefully to whatever moves in the dark outside my window, just in case.